We grew up visiting my grandparents every summer. The kid in me called it the swampy area of South Carolina. I never minded the trip down south as a kid, but I can't say the same about my dad. My dad had an interesting relationship with his parents. He didn't care to elaborate when I was in the room, but there were definitely some conversations with him and Mom that happened after I went to sleep. But anyway, being the Southern gentleman he was, my dad made sure that we made a trip out at least once a year to see the family. My grandpa was a big outdoorsman. He and my grandma lived in a comfortable but modest little place nestled in the woods surrounding a large swamp. My grandpa liked to take me fishing out at that swamp whenever he had the chance, but it always troubled my dad. Now, each summer when we arrived and I was a year older, it was obvious my grandparents were aging too. This was something that was admittedly lost on me when I was younger. But my dad could see it clear as day. So as vague as his issues with them were, he knew the truth about time in a way that I did not. That was why he kept bringing us to see them every year. Some adults are good about that, hiding emotions to ultimately do the right thing. When we arrived one summer, Grandma was sick. She had been for a few months, but now was the first Dad was hearing about it. It's hard to say if he was angry, scared, or maybe both. I didn't understand it as he did. But that was enough for us to extend our trip from a week to a month. It was also enough for him to keep his eyes trained on me and Grandpa like a hawk. I was thrilled when Dad wanted to come out fishing with us. He often used the excuse that he had too much work, or that Mom needed him around, or just about anything else under the sun, to be honest. But nonetheless, halfway through our stay, something inside him changed his mind. On that particular day, the sun was shining bright and hard through the tree cover of the forest. I had gotten used to the heat and humidity of South Carolina summers by then, so the sweat wasn't too big an issue. But gosh, that swamp was buggy. Cicadas, toad bugs, beetles, biting flies, you name it. Grandpa always had us dress in long sleeves and pants despite the temperature. He was against the use of bug spray too. Regardless of all of this, I was just so excited to have my two old men out there with me. We never went fishing all together, so this was a real treat. Dad was quiet at first. He hadn't really spoken much on the short little trek out to the swamp, sticking out like a mute amongst the joyous, boisterous laughing of me and Grandpa. Grandpa said that Dad was generally uninterested in fishing when he was growing up here, and that he'd always wished for a kid like me to come along and enjoy nature with him. Well, when Dad heard him say that he wasn't quiet anymore, in fact, he was really quick to jump in and defend himself. It wasn't the fishing, he said, but this swamp that he hated. Then it was Grandpa who was speechless. We had finally reached the fishing spot and spirits were low. I tried my best to keep things light for everyone's sake, but I knew they had to work it out by themselves. Like adults. When the sun hitched in the sky and began its slow descent from late afternoon, I realized that no one had said anything in over an hour, and worse, no one had caught any fish. That was what flipped my switch, and I suddenly burst out at the two of them. I said that it wasn't fair to me for them to ruin our day like this, and though I was no scientist and couldn't say for sure, I was pretty confident that our negativity was deterring the fish. My dad accidentally laughed. I was mad at him though, so why was he laughing? I said that the day might have been better if he'd just stayed at home. As soon as I said that though, I wished I hadn't. My dad's face fell, and when I looked to Grandpa for reassurance, his had fallen too. Before I could take it back, my dad excused himself, picked up his fishing gear, and started back home. I tried to go after him, but Grandpa held my arm. He told me that he needed to fix this, not me, and that I should stay back until sunset. Hopefully I'd have a fish by then. And with that, Grandpa left to follow Dad, and I was alone by the swamp. I loved it out there, so normally I wouldn't mind the time alone. But with everything that had been said just moments ago when there were three of us, made everything feel so strange. It was like someone had paused the previous scene, plucked out Dad and Grandpa, and allowed the film to play out as if nothing had happened. But I listened to what Grandpa had said, so I put on a smile and felt determined to bring home a catch. My focus was on the swamp for a second before I saw something move in my peripheral vision. I thought it might have been Dad or Grandpa, but when I fixed my gaze at the moving figure, I could not have been more wrong. What I saw was a giant mud-packed creature sulking behind a bush. Under the mud was a slimy layer of greenish-brown scales that coated the creature's huge 8-foot-tall body. It was like a giant lizard, but it crouched on 2 feet, giving it some type of human resemblance. I didn't know what to think or even where to start. My eyes were everywhere, taking this thing in with wonder. But its eyes, red and shining with unfiltered rage, terrified me. It was looking at me like I was a fish on a line, and my composure was how it reeled me in. It had been waiting to get me alone. For how long? Days, weeks, years, I didn't know. The longer I stayed still, the longer it had to plan its attack. I wriggled involuntarily. Maybe the fish metaphor had struck me a little too close, and the thing shifted. I did not think after that. I just ran. I forgot about my pole and all the gear that belonged to Grandpa, and I sprinted through the marshy plants toward home. I could hear the thing pursuing me, gaining on me, preparing for me. I could see the house just beyond the forest, and my feet just flew. I flung myself through the front door, panting and sweating, but I was pleased with what I saw. Dad and Grandpa sitting together at the kitchen table, hand in hand. They had fixed it. When they saw my face, their calmness vanished. I didn't want to tell them what really happened, but I did suggest that from now on, maybe the 3 of us could find a new place to fish. A place where we all felt comfortable, where we could all be together. I've heard stories like these, but I never thought it would happen to me, especially since I live in the suburbs. I guess it can happen anywhere. It was late at night. Everyone was asleep besides me and my dog, Ollie. It was a Friday night, and I stayed up to relax from work. I was just watching TV, really, flipping through the channels, nothing really in particular. I ended up staying on some sitcom, I think, until Ollie started acting weird. At first, he just raised his head a few times, looking at the window and the door wall. After a while, though, he started to growl, and then got up pacing. Something was outside, and he wasn't very happy about it. His hair was standing on end, and he wouldn't stop even when I told him to quiet down. I didn't want him to get hurt, so I put him in his crate and I put my shoes and jacket on. It was November, a week before Thanksgiving, so it was pretty chilly. There was some light snow. I turned one of the outdoor lights on, and I headed outside. I didn't hear anything at first, but the wind was starting to pick up, though. First, I thought it was just leaves blowing around. Something, though, made me feel weird. I can't really describe it. So I picked up a shovel that was leaning against the house. I had used it a few days before to dig up the flower beds. At first, I thought I was being stupid. I looked around the garage, the deck, and along the fence line, and I didn't see anything. It wasn't until I walked back towards the back door that the movement caught my eye. Just a shadow at first. I look up towards the roof and started walking back a little to get a better look. That's when I see it. It was trying to hide itself by the chimney and gripping the roof, trying to make itself look as small as possible. It was short, maybe 4 feet or 4.5. It was hard to tell because it was on all fours. Its legs and arms were long and skinny. It seemed to have some sort of nails or claws. It was hard to tell. It was dug in pretty good. But the face of this thing, well, that's what I dream about the most. That's what haunts me. It was pale, the whole thing, really, like a chalky white gray. Maybe more gray than white. It was dark out, but this thing was pretty light. Its head seemed big, but maybe that's because its body was so thin. Its eyes were huge and kind of glowed with light that was caught, like dogs' or cats' eyes do. It had slits for a nose, and its mouth was kind of trembling at first, but when it opened to hiss at me, I could see sharp teeth. I think its tongue was pointed. It shot out a little when it hissed. I didn't know what to think or do at first, but when it started moving, I remembered the shovel in my hands. I just held it up at first, but the thing kept moving, so then I started swinging it at the edge of the roof. It moved like a cat, very nimble, and it was pretty fast too. I thought maybe I could reach it on the deck. I run up the stairs, and this thing is staring right at me. I swung the shovel, and at first it backed up and moved out of the way. But when I swung maybe the third time, it reached out and slapped the blade of the shovel, knocking it back and hissing. I didn't want it to leap down on top of me. Something screamed in my head that would be extremely bad. So I recovered as best I could, and I started to jab the blade of the shovel at it now. That's when it smacked the shovel again, hard enough that I lost my balance and came crashing to the deck. I figured that was it. Whatever this thing was dead. The shovel was too far away to reach. It fell to the deck and bounced away from where I fell. I just closed my eyes and waited for this thing to drop down on me. It never did, though. I opened my eyes back up, got up, and there was nothing on the roof. It seemed to be gone. I didn't want to chance it, though. I don't know if my adrenaline was just pumping out of control or what, but I went into the garage and got a ladder. I also grabbed a hatchet I had, and I put the ladder against the roof and climbed up. I searched the entire roof. I looked at my neighbors' roofs. There was nothing. I woke up my wife in the process, and she was extremely confused. I came down, put the ladder and hatchet away, and came inside. I made sure everything was locked up tight and then told them the story. She said she believed me, but I wasn't sure. Not until the next day. It was hard to sleep. I got maybe 2 hours. I went back out in the morning and went back up on the roof to look around in the daylight. That's when I saw them. There was a group of shingles that had deep gouges in them, like claw marks near and around the chimney. I pulled them free and brought them back down to show my wife. That seemed to sink into their minds because the look she gave me was pure concern and fear. I don't know what I saw, what I tried to fight off. I replaced the shingles, and I've stayed up a few nights. It's hard to sleep now. It hasn't come back, though. I don't know if it will. If it wasn't for Ollie, I don't know what would have happened. I know that what happened to me isn't uncommon. I know I'm not crazy, and there are so many more things like it out there. I've been telling my story for years, but nobody believes that it was what it was. They all say it's impossible. But I know that I'm not crazy, and I saw it. I remember this happened about a year ago at my small local college in rural Pennsylvania. The day it happened was an otherwise typical day. I went straight to the library after class. It was fall. You know, leaves changing, crisp breezes, and lots of apple spice everywhere you look. Anyway, it was late when I finally left the library that day. The walk back home was about 20 minutes or so, but only around 10 if I cut through a little forest path from the college. I was tired that night from working on a big assignment, and so of course I chose the 10-minute shortcut back home. Any other day I would have been fine. Nothing terrible ever happened. I regret making that choice now, but you know what they say, hindsight is 20/20. About 3 minutes into the woods, I heard this awful, terrible sound of hammering on the trees all around me, as if someone was using every last ounce of their strength to slam rocks into the wood until it cracked in the air, sounding like gunshots, followed by a noise almost like an ape whooping. Usually the woods smelled like, well, woods. But on this day, it smelled like somebody had gotten too drunk and used the path as their urinal. It reeked so badly that I thought somebody must have thrown stinky garbage on the path too. So, I need to describe precisely how it smelled. Musty garbage, urine, and a wet dog would be the simple way of describing it. I should have turned around after I heard the knocking, but I was just in such a rush to get home I didn't want to do any backtracking. Plus, I never in a million years thought that it would be what it turned out to be. At the halfway point along the path is when I saw this thing, this creature. It was standing about 8 feet tall with dark reddish brown, what I can only describe as fur, covering its entire body. It was still a ways down the path in front of me. From this distance, it looked like somebody had taken one of those weird hunting suits and put animal fur all over it. A weirdly tall somebody with massive shoulders that were bunched together and had the most insane framework I'd ever seen, just honed like no other body I'd ever seen. I can remember some of the gym rats on campus showing off, but this thing, whatever it was nothing like that. This was just a wall of fur and muscle. The creature didn't see me until I started to move again. I thought I was being quiet enough not to get caught. I was wrong. The next thing I knew, it was turning around and looking at me with these soulless, beady black eyes that seemed to bore into my skull. When our eyes met, I swear it felt like my head was full of pressure. This thing's face was hairless, much like an ape. It had a strange cone head with a strong brow ridge, big protruding lips that didn't seem like they could fully close around big off-white teeth. The monstrous creature was within arm's reach of me when I finally seemed to snap back to reality. The disgusting smells I had caught a whiff of earlier were now so intense my eyes were burning and watering. The musky scent of its body was tickling my nose now too. I closed my eyes, wishing it all to go away, and I could barely open them when I felt one of its oversized hands almost touch me. But luckily, I could now hear another group of students who were also coming our way. Miraculously, the sound of the ground crunching below their feet and their loud voices were enough to scare the creature away. I opened my eyes to realize that it had stopped approaching me, and I watched as it ran off in the opposite direction. I bolted once I could no longer see the creature, running non-stop until I couldn't breathe. My chest was burning, and the scent of urine was still fresh in my memory. In the end, it took me 15 minutes to get home. I don't even remember walking the rest of the way. My mind was too focused on making sense of what I'd experienced. The smell was gone when I returned to the path the next day with my friend. I had told him about it and wanted to go back to see if I was crazy or not, but no signs of what I'd seen or what had happened to me remained. Not even a footprint was left in the mud. My friend was kind but tried to come up with a more realistic explanation when I told him about it, but even if I imagined it all, which I didn't, I still won't go on that path in the dark anymore, and I definitely won't step on that trail alone. No one I know has experienced anything similar. Do you have any suggestions on what you think I saw? I'd like some answers. It'd help me find some closure on what was the scariest night of my life. I know this is going to sound pretty cliche, but the truth is, this is something that has really stuck with me my whole life, kind of traumatized me in a way. It's not like I got hurt or anything, but man, it always feels kind of scary to talk about, even now. This whole series of events took place when I was in high school, quite a few years ago now. I still remember it clear as day, though. See, my family and I had lived in the same spot pretty much all our lives, but my dad got a really good job opportunity down in Montana. We moved there, and it was an easy enough adjustment since I was kind of a shy kid anyway, spent too much time with my internet friends to really care about the ones I had in school. But since I didn't know anyone, I didn't have much to do after classes let out other than sit alone at home waiting for my parents to get off of work. The first few weeks were completely normal, nothing of note except for the occasional creaky floorboard or spooky-sounding draft. I was pretty comfortable outdoors since my family used to own a small farm, and at the time we still had a couple of animals. I would take care of them from time to time when my parents weren't around, and I didn't mind too much either since I kind of liked the company. There was one day, though, when I came home from school to a downright massacre. My parents had told me they weren't able to feed the chickens we kept in the back before they both headed out for the day, so just check up on them when you get home from school. I did check, yes, but it was definitely too late. There was a mix of blood and feathers splattered and sprayed everywhere in the coop, not like anything I had ever seen before. The thing that really got me about that was the amount of gore, because in the past we've definitely had similar things happen, wild animals attacking and sometimes getting our chickens into trouble. But most of the time there'd be some blood in a trail, and the animal would drag the chicken away to eat it, or the animal would carry it away, or there would be a carcass with a small pool of blood, or something. But instead, the entirety of the left half of the coop was a bloodbath. I don't want to get too into the nitty-gritty, but I'll tell you this. I never ate chicken again. Seriously. Like I said, we were a farm family, so we treated our livestock very respectfully and very seriously. When this happened, my mother was very torn up about it, and my dad was downright pissed. He said that it would be his new personal mission to figure out whatever it was that did that to the chickens, and honestly, kind of got obsessive over it. Then again, though, we didn't want to lose any more animals. He set up this pretty intricate security system meant to capture footage of anything the motion sensors detected. Plus, he put a special lock on the coop door, very high-tech stuff. I had a pretty decent view of the back where the coop was through my bedroom window, so in the evenings I'd also take a peek or two out of curiosity. That's how I got a look at it one night. I was getting ready for bed and some instinct or gut feeling told me to go and look out my window. When I did, I noticed that the bushes behind the chicken coop were kind of rustling. I knew it was some kind of animal and I was interested, so I kept watching. I saw a beast, a monster, some creature. This was no standard coyote or wolf or anything of the sort. It came out through the bushes and stared at the coop from a distance. Now, all of the cameras were pointed at the coop, so naturally none of this was caught on video. Likely story, I know, but this did happen. The wolf thing was so bizarre. It had the head of a dog clear as day, but its torso and general upper body were so disgustingly human-like. It was covered in hair top to toe, but the weirdest part was that the eyes on its head were also so incredibly human. It was like a really messed up version of a Twilight werewolf or something. So this was it, the bit that really scared me, the bit that convinced me that this thing wasn't just a wild animal. It began approaching the coop, clearly with intent, and then it stopped. It stopped just a few feet short of the general area and was looking up at the cameras. This thing genuinely recognized that it would be captured on video and stopped right in its tracks, like it understood. And then, as it began to back away, it stood up on its hind legs. At this particular point, I took only a second's glance before fearfully turning away and ducking down where I knew no one could see me. I thankfully held my breath, didn't scream or anything, although Lord knows I could have. When this monster stood on its two back legs, it stood up to a height that neared the tops of the trees in the yard. Definitely 7, maybe 8 feet, which again, not a characteristic of any animal I know of. It looked so eerie, so foreign. I only looked for a second, but I know I'm not mistaken. When I was a teenager, we lived in a very small town in Idaho. It wasn't very far from Mountain Home Air Force Base. We lived on the south side of town, and there was some BLM land across the street from our house and a landfill not far away, just up the road. My siblings and I spent a lot of time running around the hills in the area. One thing is that there were a lot of sheep herders in the hills to the south, and we liked to follow them around. One night, my mom was just coming home from grocery shopping, and I heard she called to me from the driveway. But the tone of her voice sounded weird. I was the oldest, and my brother and sister were in bed already, so I wondered what she needed. I could tell she was concerned about something bigger than just her trying to get me to come bring in the groceries. My first thought was that she had spotted a coyote nearby because they had been plaguing us lately. I went running outside and she pointed to something that was hovering just south and east of us, out over the landfill. She was like, "Can you tell what the heck that is?" I was familiar with most types of aircraft. I had been attending every air show I could with my grandfather since I was a toddler, and my dad worked in aerospace as a machinist. The thing she was pointing at made a noise like a loud but distant vacuum cleaner. For example, this was not the noise you would expect out of a helicopter hovering at that range. I had seen plenty of helicopters, and it definitely wasn't that. And we grew up around airplanes, both civilian and military. This thing was not moving and appeared to be about the size of a school bus. It was hard to say exactly what shape it was, but I'm pretty sure it was triangular. It was giving off a strange glow, too. The light was like a muted green, and it was pulsating in waves. It kind of looked like when the surface of a pond is disturbed by a stone. It was just hovering there and seemed to be casting that glow down onto something below it. After we stood out there for a few minutes, it started to move really slowly. The noise got a little louder, but not what you would expect from something that large that was hovering and moving slowly. The thing traced the line of the road, north, near our home, and then we lost sight of it as it passed the little hill at the end of our road. We walked around the east side of the house to try and pick it up visually as it passed the end of our row of houses. We saw it follow the road, about 50 or 60 feet above the ground. It still wasn't making a lot of noise. But then, in literally the blink of an eye, the light went from down the road in front of us to hovering over the lights across the valley that were illuminating the ski runs off in the distance. A map will tell you this was a little over 35 miles. The crazy thing is that at that point there was no noise. It was just silent yet instant acceleration. It moved 30-something miles in a fraction of a second. We tracked it the whole time, not believing what we were seeing. It then hovered over the ski area for about a half a second. Then it shot straight up at about the same speed with which it crossed the valley. Then we lost sight of it in the star field as it went straight up from the mountain. The stars are always bright at night in that section of Idaho. I remember as it went up, it lost that glow and turned to a vivid green that got brighter and brighter. It kind of resembled a firework that didn't blow up, but it went much faster and higher. The next morning on the bus, I told the kids from the end of the row of houses about what my mom and I had seen. They made fun of me and made me the butt of jokes for over the next day or so. I was kind of a strange, nerdy kid and pretty much a social outcast. The subject didn't come up again until maybe a year later when I guess I got a little cooler and ended up being friends with one of those kids. He ended up confessing to me that he, his brother, and mom and dad had all seen the same thing, but he had been too embarrassed to admit it in front of anyone on the bus after the way they all acted. And his parents had told him not to talk to anyone about it because people would say they were crazy. To give you an idea of the timeline, this was in the early 2000s. I have since pursued a career as an intelligence analyst and have been granted privileged access to confidential data concerning aircraft and other military equipment from all developed nations. As a 96 D10 imagery analyst in the U.S. Army intelligence, my primary focus was on ground, sea, and air order of battle. Throughout my time in the military, my particular area of expertise was always AOB. My responsibility involved studying equipment imagery, understanding their functions and abilities, and relaying that information to fulfill operational needs. I had to know as much about enemy and friendly hardware as possible. I had to file accurate reports for command and to understand what it was I was looking at. And I have to tell you, nothing moves like that thing moved. Nothing we have, nothing anyone has. There will be some who choose to believe me, and others who won't. I'm confident in what I saw, but I don't anticipate ever getting a satisfactory explanation for my encounter.